Sykes with First Baptist Church Decatur and one of your stage captains for the day here at the DeKalb County stage. We are so excited to have y'all back. I want to welcome you and share a few announcements before the program begins. And this is also a good moment to make sure your cell phones are off or on silent. Our authors will be signing books after the presentation. Volunteers can direct you to the signing tent after the talk ends. You go back out the sanctuary, take a left. Signing tent will be to the left. In the interest of time, there will be no Q&A at the conclusion of the panel. Our bookseller for this session is Eagle Eye Bookshop, so please go check them out, give them some love. Books are available for purchase out there on the front lawn. Lastly, the Decatur Book Festival is a nonprofit, and it depends on sponsors and donations to bring great authors to Decatur each year. Please consider making a donation to support this effort by going to the festival website, decaturbookfestival.com. Now, please join me in welcoming our panel, Moderator Lynn Cullen, and authors Tracey Enerson Wood, Roger Jones, and Melissa Pritchard. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lynn Cullen.
Lynn, the microphone. It's on.
I go to a lot of book clubs, and I'm used to just kind of spouting off. Okay, good afternoon. It's great to be here at the Decatur Book Festival again. And we have a great panel here today. And I think we're just going to launch into it. And I hope that their books will help you to get to know them. That's my mission, for you to get to know them and their books this afternoon. So to start us out, we will be talking about your books, well, your elevator speech, or as you said, your stairwell speech. If you could each tell us, starting with you, Melissa, briefly, your book in a nutshell.
Well, writing a book about Florence Nightingale is not exactly writing in a nutshell. Her life was so long and so filled with accomplishments, achievements, and challenges that when I was writing the book, I often felt like I was trying to pour the ocean into a thimble, like I'm not doing a good job. But Florence Nightingale was the most significant woman in medicine in the 19th century. She was second in influence in Britain, only to Queen Victoria, for the number of her accomplishments, her achievements, not only in nursing, but in social reform, prison reform, many, many areas, broad areas. And so I was intrigued with her life. I was overwhelmed with her life. I was in awe of her life. And I thought, I think I'll write a novel about Florence Nightingale and try to humanize her, bring her off the bronze pedestal. She's in Waterloo Place in London. She's a huge figure in bronze. And I thought, I'm going to peel the bronze off, take the bonnet off, take the lamp away, and who was this woman? And I started with her childhood, and I did a great deal of research, at least 5 years of research to begin to know her. And I wanted to humanize her and desentimentalize her and make her an inspirational figure for people today. I think that's enough of us. That's a nutshell, yeah.
All right. Roger Jones.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here. It's a real honor. But the final victory is, it's based on a true story. And in 2005, I was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, neuroendocrine cancer. Probably the most famous person that you may have known of that actually died of neuroendocrine cancer was Steve Jobs. And a few years after that, I got introduced to a club in Charleston, South Carolina, which is where I live, the Dragon Boat Club. And if you've never heard of dragon boating, it's one of the fastest growing sports in the world. It's a old Chinese sport that got started in the United States in the mid-90s. And a lot of it was a support group for a lot of cancer survivors, and it just exploded. And I got involved with the club there in Charleston. And in 2010, we decided we wanted to put an all-cancer team together to go compete at the national championship. And at that time, the sport had grown. There was all kind of divisions, and we were the only cancer team in our division. And we really didn't think we had any chance to compete or certainly not win. But anyway, we ended up winning the national championship. And we actually earned the right to represent our division the next year in Hong Kong. But we weren't able to go because we had some pretty sick people on the boat, and several of them passed away the next year. So the final victory is a story about that team and the teammates and the journey, and just really 20 very courageous people who shouldn't have been where they were, shouldn't have accomplished what they did, but they did. So it's to honor those folks.
And it's a novel.
And it's a novel. I'm sorry, it's not a memoir. It's a novel. It's about 80% based on the true story. But I did take some liberties here and there. And usually when I talk, people say, "Well, tell me what's true and what's not true." But anyway, it's probably 80% accurate to the actual story. And one of the reasons I changed that is some of the spouses of the surviving spouses really didn't want me to do just a straight memoir, and so I changed some things.
Okay. And Tracey Enerson Wood.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to be here as well to talk about my new book, Catherine, the Wright Sister. And my particular passion is to find women in history that did amazing things that we've never heard of. Women who changed history, usually for the good, occasionally in one particular novel, maybe not so much, but I write biographical fiction about real people. And the real person in this book is probably someone you've never heard of, named Catherine Wright Haskell. I know a lot about aviation because it runs in my family, but I'd never heard of her. And Catherine Wright was the baby sister of the much more famous Orville and Wilbur Wright. But what I found out in my research is if it weren't for Catherine, the Wright brothers would not have invented the airplane, at least not when they did, because she was the one who sourced the materials. She was the one who solved the problems. She was the one that lit a fire under their little butts when they got tired or just frustrated and had crashed. She's the one who patched them up every time they crashed. So she was behind them all through the entire process. And then after they were successful and had invented the airplane, they had to market it. Well, guess what? That wasn't in their particular skill set, but it was in Catherine's. And she spoke multiple languages. And she went to Europe and she met with the kings and the queens and the princes and the prime ministers, and basically charmed all of Europe, became quite famous in Europe before they finally came back to the United States. So it's Catherine's story, but also written in 3 points of view, and Wilbur and Orville also speak of their journeys, but really as it relates to everything that Catherine had done. So,
Wonderful. Your main characters in all your books are on heroic quests, and they were daunted along the way. So this is a two-part question. Would you tell us, and we'll start back again with you, Melissa. Would you tell us the major obstacles, some of them, there's tons of them, but some of the major obstacles that they encountered, and also, what were some of the major obstacles you encountered in writing about them? So it's kind of a hairy question.
Two-part question.
Yeah.
Those are good questions. Florence was born on May 12, 1820, into a wealthy family, an elite family. That doesn't sound like an obstacle, but it became an obstacle for her when at the age of 16, she said she heard the voice of God call her, ask her to alleviate the suffering of the world, to help the suffering people of the world. This event was so important to her that 50 years later, she wrote in her commonplace book, which is what they called journals in those days. That was her Jubilee year. She noted it down because it drove the rest of her life, that first call from God. And the first time it happened, she wrote in her commonplace book on that day when she was 16, God called me to do something, but he didn't tell me exactly what. And so the next few years were spent determining what she was to do. And she finally settled on the idea of being a nurse. Now today that sounds rather noble and rather professional and good, but in the 1800s, 19th century, being a nurse was about the most disreputable thing you could be for a woman, especially a woman from someone of Florence's class. A nurse was considered less than an actress, of lower stature than an actress, of lower stature than a prostitute even. I mean, it was a terrible thing to be. So of course, one of the first obstacles, well, her parents were horrified. How dare she think of something like that? She's supposed to get married and produce a son so that all their property can go down the line directly to the son and the family fortune will be preserved. No, Florence would have none of it. So she had to spend it was over 10 years, fighting her parents' objections, fighting the misogynistic world in which she was born, male-dominated, hierarchical. No one opened the door for her to become a nurse, and she kept trying. She tried and tried, and she went through episodes of depression, near suicide at one point. And at that point, her father relented because he loved her very much and he didn't want to lose her. So he let her go study at Kaiserwerth Hospital in Germany, and then she ended up running an institute for distressed gentlewomen in London. These were governesses who were ill. And from there, she went to the Crimea, and her whole career started. But the objections were numerous. And then when she came back from the Crimea, she'd become very ill with brucellosis, or what at the time they called a Crimean fever. And it was a debilitating disease. She was in constant pain. She did most of her work from her bed. She had to be carried across rooms. But she spent the next 50 years after the Crimea reforming healthcare, not only in England and Wales and Ireland, but in other parts of the world as well, including India, from her bed. And so the will that this young woman had to overcome all the objections, including ill health, parental, governmental. When she went to Crimea, none of the people there wanted her there. British women nurses had never served in wartime. There had never been women nurses in wartime. Florence took the first contingent over and nobody wanted them. So she had to overcome a lot there too, a lot of resistance. So those are some of the things she had to overcome. For me, not much to overcome. I was obsessed for years with her. A lot of obsession, a lot of research, a lot of note-taking, maybe the worst part was the 24 versions I wrote of this book. That was the hardest. I'll just end with this. I thought I had finished it at one point. I really was quite proud of it. I thought it was good. My agent read it. She said, "It's wonderful. I'm sure we can sell it immediately." I was like, she'd never said that to me before. So I was like, oh, we are really good. She could not find anybody to buy it. Any of the publishers, the editors, they all said they loved the writing, but nobody was excited about it enough to make an offer. So my agent said to me, "Melissa, I hate to say this, would you consider rewriting it again?" And a very little voice came out of me that said, "Yes." And I sat on my couch depressed for about 2 weeks, and then I decided I'm going to read all these historical novels I can find, all the ones I've loved, all the new ones. I'm not really read them, but see how they're structured, see how they're put together, see what interests me. And all of a sudden, after about 3 or 4 months of reading all these other novels, the idea came to me how to fashion this one. And then I wrote it in 3 or 4 months, and it's done really, really well, and people really, one of the first things they'll say to me is, "I love the way the book is constructed." So I overcame that big obstacle, I guess you could say. But yeah, we all have obstacles, right? And I think Florence has inspired me in my life to be strong, to be strong-willed, and to not let things knock me over except for a second, and then you get up again. We all have our obstacles to overcome.
I'm curious, was the form totally different that when you first submitted it? Like it was...
Radically different. The early form was, it was read like I love 19th century fiction. I'll read 19th century novels. I love the 19th century. So of course I wrote a novel that was a mirror of the time and the pacing and the richness. It was very long. All the chapter headings, book 1, book 2. It was very, yes. But I think, and this was during COVID that I was writing this, and I think people's minds could not they had moved on. The way we absorb things now is a little bit different. And so, no, this is completely different. It's very short chapters with interesting times. It moves very differently and very quickly, and I think that's part of its appeal. And it makes her more human, too. She was kind of recessed in all that prose, you know? Mm-hmm. She was kind of still veiled behind all the 19th century language I was using. You kind of couldn't feel her, and I think you really know her and feel her in this version. I hope.
Roger, and to refresh our memories, the major obstacles that your characters were daunted by along the way, and also any obstacles you might have had in the writing.
My protagonist was diagnosed with cancer, and he had been a very successful coach and turned businessman, and was successful in business. And he had a lot of issues, trust issues, anger issues, that better? Okay, anger issues, trust issues, just bitterness in his life. So when he was introduced in the book to this community of people in the dragon boat community, and they wanted to start competing, they asked him, because they learned he was a coach, ex-coach, they wanted him to coach a team, and he was extremely reluctant to do so. And he looked down on them, felt like they were just probably a bunch of losers trying to do something that they could never do. So he didn't have a very good attitude about all that at all. Now, some people ask me, is that patterned after you? And it depends on who you ask, whether you ask me or my wife. You could get two completely different answers depending on who you might ask that question to.
Let's hear both then.
What's that?
Let's hear both then. Yours and your wife's.
Yeah, so anyway, he had
all right.
he had some real issues that he had to overcome, and maybe as we move along I'll share with you a little bit of what happened with him and where he actually ended up and began to see some of the things in his life that he really needed to see. So, and that was his challenges. I think my challenges with writing this book, well, first of all, I had to learn how to write, because I decided I wanted to be a writer. And I was a PE major in college, and I didn't go to English classes, so I had a long ways to go, and I started going to classes and seminars and conferences, and as we were talking before earlier, it took me 5 years to write a book. And it's so horrible. It's stuck in my drawer, in my closet, in my house, that nobody should ever be punished to read it. I think every author probably has a book like that. But anyway, I think the real biggest challenge, other than just learning the craft and how to put a book together, was these characters were based on real characters, real friends, and how would I didn't feel like I was reluctant to write this book for a while. And my wife kept telling me, said, you need to write the Dragon Boat book. I don't know. But I just didn't feel like I was maybe a good enough writer to start with. And I didn't know if I could honor these people the way I felt like they needed to be honored, and what they did in their memory, and then their spouses and family and so forth. So that was a struggle of really trying to find that voice that was right for them mainly. And so that was something I had to struggle with to get at peace with my own self about it.
And, that was your first book, but
Yes.
I'm here to tell you, I don't know that gets easier.
It probably doesn't.
Each time, yeah. Tracey.
Okay, so some challenges. You might imagine that if you're trying to invent something that didn't exist before or had always failed before, you might have some challenges. And the Wright brothers, the Wright family, became obsessed with inventing a successful airplane. And this was not something new. Lots of people were trying to do that over, since Leonardo da Vinci, been trying to invent the airplane. And they came along at a time where other aviation pioneers were trying to fly and failing. I know some of us may be old enough to remember an old black and white short film that had this jingle to it. And it was those magnificent men in their flying machines, and they go up the up, and they go down the down, right? And there's a 12-wing thing just collapsing, because that's what was happening, right? So they were going to succeed, right? But it wasn't a matter of just inventing an airplane. In order to do that, they had to invent a whole lot of other things first. And they had to find the materials to build these things. They built wings out of cotton and sticks, basically. And they had to find exactly the right thing. It wasn't like they could go down to the hardware store and buy a wingtip, They had to invent everything along the way. They had to source everything along the way. And they also had to hide what they were doing, because there were many people, spies out there, trying to see what they were doing so that they could copy it and patent it and, of course, benefit from all their hard work. So at the same time they were doing all these things, they had to hide what they were doing. And some of the ways they did that was kind of fun and interesting, and that's one of the places I had fun with scenes. So the second part of the question was, what challenges did I have as an author? Well, one of them was the always tightrope you have to walk as a historical fiction writer between fact and fiction. Basically, readers want it all to be fact, right? They just do. I know I do. You want it all to be true. But if we wrote it that way, and we wrote nonfiction, and it's a wonderful thing, but it is not a novel, and it is very different. So you have to walk this little bit of a tight walk. What is fact? What is fiction? What are you sort of allowed to make up as a novelist? And what thing better be right? And it comes down to sometimes things like, what shoes did they wear in 1903, right? What hairstyles did they have? What were they eating for dinner? What was the music? Those are the things you have to get right. Now, the things that you get to play with, my little playground, are things that are not really documented in history. And those, to me, are kind of the fun things. Those are the relationships, the dialogue. Where were they sitting when they made this decision to go to Kitty Hawk, right? History tells us they went to Kitty Hawk, starting in 1900. Well, I get to put them around the dinner table or out at the river or wherever I choose to put them. So that is something I've learned to navigate, since this is my fourth historical novel, and it's now becoming kind of my favorite part as well.
So we'll start with you, since you're warmed up here. How do you do your research? Where has it taken you for this book? I bet you've been more than a few places with your other books.
Well, here's a lesson learned. Anybody who's starting out on this, here's my tip. When you go to pick a setting, a book you want to write about, make sure it's somewhere you want to go anyway. And guess what? I have set books in France, Paris.
Well done.
Po, France, the Wright brothers, they went to France. They also, of course, grew up in Dayton, Ohio, which I have very, very personal connections to. It's my husband's hometown, and it became my hometown and my kid's hometown since he was in the Army and we no longer had a place to live. Dayton was where Grandma and Grandpa were, so Dayton became home. So this particular story really, really appealed to me for, France and Dayton for the settings and other reasons as well. So that's always a super, super important thing.
Research, no. Well, we lived it. We lived the research, and I think really trying to put the structure of the story together in a book format that would make sense and would be easy, hopefully, and fun to read was a lot of research in terms of putting that aspect together. And just thinking back about what moments really made the whole experience special and what people made special, and looking at the obstacles that some of our teammates actually had to go through to be there and to accomplish. So, I think in that in that aspect, in this specific book, that would probably be, the thing I would say as far as research would be.
And could you enlighten us as to what that sport entails?
Dragon boating?
Mm-hmm.
Well, dragon boating is, I don't know if any of you ever seen a dragon boat race or actually seen a dragon boat, but it's a 2,000-year-old sport. And actually, it was started in the United States in the mid-'90s, and a physician that was treating breast cancer patients in Vancouver wanted to do a study. And at that time, they discouraged women that were overcoming breast cancer treatment and surgeries and so forth from exercising, because they felt like the side effects of exercise was bad for them. And he disagreed. So he put a study together and wrote a paper on it, published a paper, and the women just did phenomenal. I mean, they just got so much better. They withstood treatments and surgery, and then it became a real support group. And so from that point, the dragon boat sport really began to explode, and all over Canada and all over the United States. And there's hundreds of thousands of people who do it here in the United States now. And it's all over the country. But it's a 45-foot canoe, basically, if you will, or a big boat. And it has 20 paddlers, 10 on the right, 10 on the left. And the whole team obviously has to practice together and paddle in sync and timing and so forth. So, and they're races all over the country. So does that share enough about it, or what do you?
Well, yeah. So
But go
you
ahead.
did this in Charleston.
Yeah, we have a club in Charleston, and it was begun by a lady who wanted to do a study about just cancer patients in general, not just breast cancer, and she got a grant to put some people in a boat and start paddling, and again, it was just so healthy for them, and then the club there in Charleston just began to grow and explode, and there's probably 500 members there now.
Is there a club in Atlanta? Like
Yes.
if we wanted to go see one
Yeah.
of these
We,
dragon boats, could we?
What is it, where they have is it Lake Lanier, where they have where they did the Olympic trials back? They have a great club here in Atlanta, and that's where and we've paddled there many times, and they have a real active club here in Atlanta, and that's where they do the races at Lake Lanier, at that venue where they did the Olympic races when the Olympics were here. Yeah. But it's a very active club here in Atlanta.
Sounds like a sight to see.
It is. You'd enjoy it.
Yeah. And Melissa?
Yes, well, I'm with Tracey with write a book that you get to go somewhere really wonderful. And I love writing historical fiction. I write contemporary fiction as well, but it's about half and half. So in terms of the Nightingale novel, it started out in 2013 in May. I was in London on a fellowship writing another historical novel about Frances Anne Kemble, the famous Shakespearean actress. And I saw the advertisement for the Florence Nightingale Museum, and I had read a little child's biography of her when at some point years ago. And I thought, oh, she was interesting. I think I'll take a break from my work on Fanny, and I'm going to go to this little museum. I love museums. So I walked all the way in the rain to this little museum attached to St. Thomas's Hospital. And I walked in, and it was cold and rainy, and I walked in, and there was no one else in this museum but me, except that I paid the ticket to the lady in front. And I got lost in this museum. I don't even know how much time passed. I was completely absorbed in her life, the Crimean War, the fact that Leo Tolstoy was there the same time she was. There was her stuffed owl, Athena, her whole story. And then I stood in front of a portrait of a man I came to know well in my research, Sidney Herbert, an engraving, a pen and ink engraving, and I said, oh, she knew him very well. They were very close. No, it wasn't romance. I don't think that. Something, though. And then it just came over me like a little lightning bolt. You're going to write a novel about this woman. And I was like, I am. Okay. So on my way out of the museum, I bought every book that was in the gift shop. The only thing I didn't buy were the paper dolls, Florence Nightingale's paper dolls. I bought all the books, stuffed them in my bag. I wasn't able to get to the research for years because I had to finish the other book. But so that was my first moment with Florence. And then I wrote most of it and rewrote most of it during COVID. So at that point, it was all books. It was research online. I couldn't go to the British Library. I couldn't go to all these fabulous places. I had to just work at home. So I went in deep into my imagination, and which, is another wonderful way to travel, and did lots and lots of research with all the books I had bought, other books I got online. And then I just got home the other day from a trip to England to take the book on a reading tour in England, and I got to stay in Florence Nightingale's childhood home. She had two homes, of course. One was called Lea Hurst in Derbyshire, in Derbyshire, England, a gorgeous, gorgeous area. And yes, I slept in her bedroom. Her home, it's beautiful. It's an estate, a country estate with lots of lambs and sheep and fruit tree. I mean, it is a dream. It is everything you picture of rural England to the extreme. And so it's now a bed and breakfast, but I was the only guest. And plus we had arranged a whole event with all these scholars, Nightingale scholars, historians, archivists, local enthusiasts from the villages around to come to tea and sit in the former library and by a fire. And I read all the Lea Hurst sections to this group of about 30 people. And it was one of the most magical days of my life. And then afterwards we broke for tea and biscuits. And then we came back in and sat again. They didn't want to leave. And we all talked about Nightingale. And finally it ended up, we were trading ghost stories. And I was hearing about the ghost of Nightingale in the house too. And then we decided to call it an evening, but it went on almost till dusk. Everyone was so happy. But I just want to say, when I was at home having to just use my imagination, I use a lot of sensory details in my writing. I think writers are very sensuous creatures. A lot of them are good cooks too, a lot of writers, because we just love the senses. So I used a lot of my sensory imagination to fill in things along with the research. But anyway, I invite you, if you ever can get out to Lea Hurst, Derbyshire, England, you can stay in the most magnificent place and walk in Florence Nightingale's spirit. She's there everywhere. Yeah. So that was a big thrill for me. I don't know if that has anything to do with what we're talking about.
No, it's great. It's absolutely great.
I just had to brag about that a little bit.
Well, this leads to the next question I wanted to ask, because it sounds like this is the case. There's some of the Western North Native American tribes believe that there's only so many stories, and that they choose you. And did you have that feeling? I'll be asking you.
Every book I've written, every story I've written, I have felt it's chosen me. And if I don't, an old writing friend told me once, stories, I suppose novels too, are like trains that come along for you. And if you don't get on that train and it passes you by, you probably won't ride it. And I thought, really? That's serious. So anyway, I always remember that whenever I get that feeling of it's calling me, it calls me, it's obsessing me, it won't leave me alone. And with Florence, it was like a lightning bolt. But I know, and I think you have to have that, because it takes so much energy and so much fuel to get through a book, the process of writing a book, finishing a book. You have to be obsessed. You have to be, you have to live and breathe this book and hope that whoever, your husband, your wife, your friend, whoever's with you, can put up with you. My husband said to me, we got married during all this, and he said, I never realized what it would be like to be married to a writer.
Oh, gosh.
He said, but that's okay. I think he had a romantic idea of it.
And you?
Well, I think this story chose me. The first two books I wrote, I think I chose them. And I think that's why they weren't that good. And I forced them. I could tell myself forced them. And from the time I started with this, it really began to flow, and it just was there, and the words were there. And I'd go to sleep at night thinking about the next scene, and it was just amazing. The next morning I'd wake up, and the scene was in my head. And so I'd get up and write it. It just seemed like it came in a much more natural fashion. And I don't know that I agree that there's only so many stories. I mean, stories are magnificent and life-changing and wonderful, and I believe there's an endless supply of great stories that we all have in us, and storytelling, whether it's writing or just talking or sharing, is powerful, and I firmly believe storytelling changes lives. So, but this one chose me.
And, okay, you're going to lead into my next question, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I have to go with the stories chose me. My first novel was The Engineer's Wife, and I was looking to write something quite different. I was writing a play, and I wanted to write a story about a family that was in a dangerous business that was handing it down, and that, something bad happened. And that came from my own experience as a military spouse and the mother of my son, who was in a very dangerous occupation in the Army. And I wanted to write about that. But I couldn't find the right family. I didn't want to write about a military family, too close to home. But the story of the Roeblings just sort of fell in my lap, and it was about building the Brooklyn Bridge, which I knew about. I grew up in northern New Jersey, and it's an icon of New York. And I did not know the story of Emily Roebling, who basically rescued the project and got the bridge built when was not going to be built if not for her. So I just sort of got obsessed with that story. I can't even tell you why, but it just haunted me, and I knew I had to write this story because no one had written it. And then after that, all right, so after about, 7 years, right, of researching and writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and learning lots of engineering stuff, because in order to explain to my readers what's going on, they had to kind of understand how you build a bridge in more simplified terms, but still, I had to understand it. My head hurt so much after learning all of that, because I am not an engineer, I love life sciences, but I was a nurse by background. So I figured for my next book, I'm going to write about something I know, and it won't hurt my head so much. So then I found the story of Julia Stimson, an amazing World War I era nurse who recruited 65 nurses to go over to the war in France to man hospitals at the front before we even sent troops over there, because the British and the French were desperate, and that's what she did. She wasn't an army nurse to start off with. So that came to me just trying to find a great nurse in history, and she was. The president's wife came to me, well, kind of for selfish reasons, I have to say. It was going to be mostly set in Northern Virginia, where I happen to have a set of 4 grandchildren and a daughter and a son-in-law, and I knew I'd be there a lot, so I wanted to, be able to research and drag those kids to every museum in Virginia, which I did. But I also thought the story was really important historically, because it's partly romance. It's a romantic story between Woodrow Wilson and Edith Wilson, his second wife, but it's also about how Edith and her collaborators took over and hid Woodrow Wilson's severely compromised condition after his stroke, and hid him away and then acted for him. So I thought historically this was a really important story to tell. And then with Catherine, I was drawn to it, as I mentioned before, for very personal reasons, because of Dayton and our history in aviation. And I really wanted to tread, things that I knew about, because I feel that I have a duty to my readers to tell stories that I should be the one to tell, that I've got something personal and special to bring to the party, right? And I do like to tell this little story because it's just a little mystical what happened to me. And I have to preface it by saying I'm not like a paranormal kind of Ouija board kind of person. I'm not. I was a nurse, right? I'm down to earth. And so I wanted to go on site because I love on-site research. On-site research is no replacing that, right? And I knew that the Wright family home had been moved to Dearborn, Michigan. It was no longer in Dayton. So I went out there, and I knew that I really wanted to see Catherine's bedroom. I knew downstairs there was a parlor, a living room, a kitchen, no bathrooms, and the bedrooms are upstairs. And I don't know, it just called to me. I knew I needed to know this family. I needed to know where they lived. So I went in, and there were actually quite a few other people in this tiny little home in Dearborn, Michigan, on this very cold Michigan day. And I kept looking up the stairs, because there was this golden light coming through a window upstairs shining down. So I'm waiting to go up there, and then I see the very dreaded velvet rope. You know the velvet rope I'm talking about? You couldn't go up those stairs because that was guarded off from the tourists because the home was 160, 70 years old, and it had been moved from Dayton to Dearborn, so I couldn't go up there, and I was very disappointed. But this is where coming from New Jersey comes into play, because all the other people there were huddling because it was cold, and I could just kind of let all the other people go off into the little kitchen, and I've cornered this docent by now. And she had talked a lot about Catherine, and I told her, this is when I'm a novelist, and I'm researching, and these are my other 3 books, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just kind of staring up the stairs and looking at the robe. Eventually, she finally said, "Would you like to go upstairs?" So I did. I got to go past the velvet rope, and I went up these magical stairs, and I could see this golden light coming through, and it was Catherine's bedroom. And I went in the bedroom, and there was this golden light coming in on this dreary, horrible Michigan day, and it was shining on this beautiful wooden bed that had a light golden color quilt. And the wallpaper was white and golden striped roses. And this is where it gets a little weird. I had like this mystical feeling. I felt Catherine's presence so strongly. And I felt that she was telling me to write her story, that she trusted me with her story. And from that moment on, I knew I had to write her story. And I had to do right by it. I had to research it really well. I had to represent all of them very well. And that she, like I said, she trusted me with it. So one other little thing that happened while I'm standing up there in the stairs and the docent is patiently waiting for me, I decided I was going to write a scene right there, right with that light, just as it was. And the scene was going to be between Orville and Catherine, because that's a strong relationship through the whole arc of the book. And I knew I had to establish it early and with feeling. So I wrote what I think it was a very special, not a long scene, but a very special scene. So I hope if you read that you'll think of me and the velvet rope and why I wrote that scene.
Wow. So did you have a pad of paper, or how did you whip that out?
They're all up here.
Oh,
I
you
wrote
just-
it in my, when I write, I imagine my scenes just as you do. I'm seeing them, I'm feeling them, I'm smelling them, and I'm picturing the scenes. I kind of already know what happened in history, right, through my research. But at this stage, I'm thinking, where's this going to happen? Where's this going to happen? And I've seen it all. Like I'm watching a movie on my forehead. And then when I go to actually write it, it comes quite easily then.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah,
I'd like to
please.
say something in relation to all that you've just said about sometimes you get an almost mystical sense of something. I think writers, we find ourselves in interesting energy territories sometimes, especially historical novelists, because we're conjuring up the past and people from the past. And it does some, and we're focused and concentrated, and sometimes things happen like that. I was in Istanbul this last September, a year ago, this September, because I wanted to see Florence Nightingale's, there's a little museum there in the army barracks, Scutari. It's very hard to get in there, but I just want to say, because I won't take too much time, but the museum was interesting. It was small. We were followed by these army officers, because it's now a Turkish army barracks, and they're very strict. So we weren't allowed, they didn't really want us there. But an author can sometimes get herself into interesting, I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, and they'll open the door or lift the yellow rope, for you. But anyway, we went up this winding iron staircase that all these 38 nurses had to go up every day to get up to their quarters, which were extremely cramped. And all of a sudden I felt it before I saw it, there was this enormous desk. It was an ugly desk. It was just plain brown wooden desk with like a banker's chair behind it, nothing special. And I stood in front of it and I felt an energy come off this desk that almost knocked me to the floor. It was so powerful. And I was just standing there. I didn't know what to say. And all of a sudden the man behind me who gave the tour said, that was Florence Nightingale's desk that she wrote all her correspondence from during the war. I was like, and I thought maybe I'd been imagining it, but no. And then my husband was behind me, and he's kind of a skeptic about, he doesn't like woo-woo things. He's a retired surgeon, and he's very, granite-like, things have to be proven. And I heard him behind me, and he said, she's here. And I looked, and he had tears in his eyes. Oh. I thought, oh my gosh, she really is. So as a person can leave an energy trace, and hers was very strong around that desk. So yeah, these things, a lot of ghost stories we can tell as writers, I think, getting close to our subjects in history.
Do you have a mystical story associated with your...
Now it's your turn. Tell us a mystical story.
I don't know if I have a mystical story or not. No.
One up, you're a novelist, so make it up.
I don't think so.
Maybe your next book.
I think that's our reward, though, for being writers and putting in the years and the solitude. I think, I don't know if that opens us up or if that's our reward, but I think that is a little gift that we sometimes get.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You'll get yours. Hang in there.
Yours is coming.
Yep. Oh, I have 5 minutes. Well, I was going to ask, but that pales compared to these experiences you're talking about. But did the writing of your book change your life? This particular book, how did it change your life? And Roger, we'll start with you.
Well, I think in the whole process with the journey I went through changed my life. I don't, without having cancer and going through the journey that I went through, I would have ever did what I did. I would have never written a book. It was, and I don't consider myself a writer, really. I think I have a few stories I'd like to share and tell, and so that's where I am in the process. But I think writing this, it brought that experience to a fruition, if you will. Not only for myself, but for some other people, and we saw the magic that happened with these people. So I think that changed my life and brought some closure, and to not only myself but to other people.
Yeah, they say reading is magic, but writing is too.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
Yes. Melissa.
Oh, yes. This book probably changed me more than any other book I've written. First of all, the subject, Florence Nightingale. Walking in her shadow, shadowing her, trying to feel her, how she became who she was from a child who loved animals and nursing the sick in her household and all of that. How did she become this enormous figure? I learned a lot about compassion. I learned a lot about courage, her immense courage. And what she believed was that she was very deeply religious, not in a conventional way. In fact, she was something of a heretic, something of a radical. She was a universalist. Today, we would be much more comfortable with what she believed than back in the 1800s. People were there. But she believed that we all are part of the divine and that we come in with a purpose, that we're to fulfill, a gift, you could say, a purpose, and that we are, our duty is to fulfill that purpose and through it serve others, uplift others out of suffering. Every one of us has to answer the question of suffering at one point in our lives. What do we do about human suffering? I mean, even today with the climate crisis and wars and upcoming elections and our own suffering in our own homes, all of us have to deal with suffering in some way, answer the question of suffering. Florence walked right into it. God asked her to. She believed it was God. She heard his voice several more times in her life. She called them impressions. And that gave her the fortitude, the strength, the courage to just walk through things that you just can't even believe. And then fight for these young soldiers who had no privileges, who were poor, who a lot of them spoke Gaelic, they didn't even speak English. She made sure they got their pay, she made sure their families got, she just walked where others refused to walk, she went. And I learned so much by her example that it gives me more courage. I feel like I have more courage. Or she could be a role model, an inspiration, and I'm hoping she'll be an inspiration for other people who read the book, and also for nurses, because nurses are going through a huge crisis right now. I was just in England meeting with the Nightingale Foundation, which works with nurses and midwives, and they're too having a huge crisis of retention. You know, nurses are leaving, they're burned out. There's inequalities, there's racial inequalities. There's a lot of problems in nursing right now. And Florence turned nursing from a disreputable, horrible thing that no one should, it was like, you don't want to do that, to a noble, paid, salaried profession for women, particularly at first, and a calling to be called to nursing. And she also called it an art. Nursing is an art. And she said, I think it may be the highest of the arts. It's not just a thing you do, it's an art form. So I think she taught me a great deal, and since the book's been out, and I've been going around and giving readings and talks and meeting all kinds of people, and I've spoken to nurses' colleges and nurses. I'm getting involved in nursing organizations and perhaps collaborating with nurses' projects. It's just been, it's changing my life right now as I sit here. And I love it. I'm really excited for the future and I think Florence is a good role model for a lot of young people today. I really do. It's been recommended as a book for YA even, which surprised me. But I think it could be, yeah. I think young people need inspiration right now, need a sense of purpose and selflessness.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And to wrap it all up, was your life changed? I'm sure it was. How was your life changed? Let me rephrase that.
I don't think you can go through this journey without changing. And one of the things that this book in particular brought to me was such an appreciation for the things that people who went before us did for us. I mean, we get on a plane and we go to from wherever, and we complain that the plane is 15 minutes late and I don't have enough place for my knees, right? And here are the people who risk their lives pretty much on a daily basis in order to bring that to us, to invent it to us. Catherine gave up her life. She wanted to have a home, a family, and kids like other women of her day. And she gave all that up in order to support the family project. And that just can't help but make you feel that you have to appreciate all these things that were done for you, and that maybe it should inspire you to work harder for the future generations as well. So that was one thing. The other thing that has changed me and has increasingly through all my books was, as Melissa was saying, is going out and talking to people and meeting people and seeing how books affect their lives. And it's so very, very important. And in this particular book, I've had a pretty extensive book tour, and I've met lots of people. And some of the first places I went were North Carolina and Ohio, both of which sort of fight over the title of who is responsible for the invention of the airplane, with North Carolina claiming to be the first in flight and Ohio being birth of aviation. And I got asked in these places, and that's like choosing between your children. I actually got asked in North Carolina, so which state do you think, has the bigger claim to the birthplace of aviation? And it's like, well, which state are you in, It's like choosing between your children, you don't make that. So of course I fudged it, I'm a novelist. But meeting those people, and they would bring their stories to me. Usually when they come to one of my events, it's because they have some kind of interest in aviation or nursing or New York City or whatever. And they bring to me their stories and what it means to them. And that is so very, very special, and I treasure and always will.
Thank you. And I think we're out of time. Thank you all for your
Thank you. Thank you.
lending us your insights.
Thank you, Lynn, for moderating. Thank you, Tracey, Roger, Melissa, for being here today. That concludes our session. The authors will be signing right after this to the tent to the left, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.